Next, we're going to do something really, I think, incredible and insightful for you on kind of understanding what it's like to be a product manager. And again, speaks to something I continue to be impressed with, which is this company and our brand's ability to get really incredible people to say they'd like to come spend some time with us. We are going to bring to the stage, that's okay. Now let's try that again. We're going to bring to the stage an expert in product management who's going to talk to us about what it's like to be a product manager and some things that they do. He's now a CEO of his own company, NoteJoy, which is a fantastic company and application. He's an industry expert. He's someone that folks look to on product management. What are the trends? What are people doing? And I think we're extremely fortunate to have Sachin Rekhi here today to talk to us about product management. So please join me in giving Sachin a huge user testing welcome.
Awesome. All right. I'm excited to be here today to spend in about the next hour to talk to you a little bit about what is product management, what do product teams care about, and what product management is all about. So what I'm hoping to do is cover these three questions to kind of give you a deep sense of, first, where do product managers fit in the R&D organization? You guys are already spending time selling to other parts of the R&D organization, but let me kind of give you a sense of where PMs fit throughout that entire organization. I then want to dive in and tell you in grave detail, what do product managers actually do on a daily basis? It's one of these more amorphous roles, so it's really helpful to understand what a day-to-day looks like and what are the key responsibilities and deliverables of product managers. And finally, I want to talk about how product management roles differ across companies. You'll see that actually, even within a company, there's different kinds of product managers. And product management is still a fairly new field, and so we're only now starting to see some of that differentiation between roles happening, and different companies treat product management very differently. So we'll talk to some of those differences across the organizations. All right, but before we do that, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been lucky enough to really have 6 product management roles throughout my career. I started my career at Microsoft working as a product manager. Turns out the confusing thing about Microsoft is they call product managers program managers, and their product managers are in fact product marketers. So super confusing, but something to keep in mind if you're selling to Microsoft. But started my career there. I saw product management at one of the largest product management organizations. Company at the time had over 40,000 employees, way bigger now. And I've worked at other behemoths like LinkedIn. When I was there, it was 10,000 employees. So I've seen product management in large organizations, in tech companies, but I'm also a founder as well. I've actually started 3 companies. You can see the 3 on the bottom: Anywhere.fm, Connected, and now NoteJoy. And these companies, I actually kind of started from the very beginning, starting with just a couple of co-founders and then growing them and scaling them. So I've seen product management at the very beginning, at the smallest organization as well. So we'll talk a bit about some of the differences there. I'm currently the founder and CEO of NoteJoy, which is a collaborative notes app. Think of it like an Evernote, but made to make it really easy to share your notes with the entire team. And so we see tons of teams using this for a variety of scenarios, whether it's making it really easy for capturing and sharing notes. We have R&D teams and product teams using this. We also have sales and marketing teams that love it as a way to kind of collaborate with each other. And so that's what NoteJoy is. In addition to working on product management myself, I've also been an advisor to 10 different startups, mainly focusing on product strategy. Everything from kind of consumer startups in here like Zently, as well as sales tools like Node and Pattern. All right, so enough about me, but let's dive right in and talk about where do PMs fit in the R&D organization. So let me walk you through kind of what a typical R&D organization looks like. You're going to see here kind of biases towards company sizes of, I'd say, 500 plus, where you have all the individual roles, and then we'll talk about how that, as you get smaller, changes. So when we're talking about kind of the R&D organization, we're talking about all people involved in building, shipping, creating products. This has a bit of a bias to kind of consumer tech. That's kind of where my experience is, but you do see this translate to other industries as well. But when you talk about that, what we always start with is kind of the core product team. This is the kind of smallest unit within a product R&D organization that's responsible for building products. And so this obviously includes the product manager, but also includes the software engineers, the people who are writing the applications that you're using on a day-to-day basis. It's the people that product managers are interfacing with on a day-to-day basis. And what they're doing is, while the software engineer is responsible for figuring out the architecture of the application, writing the code, a product manager actually has to work with them on a regular basis to make trade-offs. Because you're constantly making trade-offs on, should we build this feature? Should we architect it this way? And those implications have not only implications on the schedule, but also on the user experience and what will actually come out the other end of the experience. And that's where the product manager interfaces with software engineers. You have a similar relationship between product managers and designers. While designers are very much responsible for ultimately driving the end-to-end user experience within the application, product managers are deeply involved with that as well. And while they're not the ones who are building the actual comps and the designs, they're the ones who are informing the product requirements. The product managers are the ones who are informing what do we actually build in the first place. And so that actually ends up being super valuable for that relationship between product managers and designers. Similar with testers. Product managers, testers are the ones who are actually doing QA and quality assurance, so you're actually building the application that you want. But product managers are the ones that are verifying that actually, is this intended behavior or is this in fact a bug? And so this is kind of the core unit that product managers are working with on a regular basis. A key thing to remember here is that none of these individuals report to the product manager. One of the biggest challenges with product management as a title is they don't actually manage anyone. What they manage is the product. They don't manage the people. So that software engineer reports to a director of engineering who reports to a VP of engineering. That designer reports to a director of design who reports to a VP of design who reports all the way up in the organization. So none of these people are actually reporting to the product manager. And the reason that's super important is that the product manager actually has to leverage this important skill set, which is called influence without authority. That they need to influence these stakeholders that they're working with on a regular basis to convince them, hey, this is the design we should be building. Hey, here's the trade-offs we should be making from an engineering perspective. But they don't have the authority to do so from the perspective of these folks don't report to them. Oftentimes, people think of it of more like a dotted line relationship. And so what you'll find in the product management role is there's so much of this discipline around communication, building rapport with other people, leadership skills that matter a ton to being successful in this role. All right, so we talked a bit about the core team, but it turns out there's a lot more people involved in building product. And so what you typically see is that product core teams then work with a set of shared resources. The difference here being is that these folks are usually not dedicated to a given feature or a given product team. They're instead shared resources that move around to collaborate with different product teams. And so what ends up happening is a core product team has to basically bid on these resources by negotiating with them, get access to those resources for the time they're working on a given project, and then they move on. These shared resources could be anything from product marketers who work very closely with the product team to translate features into go-to-market messaging and positioning and core benefits for the customer, and also help a ton with actually taking a given product out to market. And so they're usually aligned with product management when a new product is coming out, a rev on the features are coming out, and working with them closely. Similarly, UX designers are working with product managers and designers. And again, they're usually commissioned by the product team and the design team to actually work on specific projects. And you end up kind of having to get those resources within an organization kind of focused on your project. You have similar thing with other aspects of the organization. Maybe there's some legal concerns about what you're building, so you have to go review it with the legal team. Oftentimes, some of your best sources of actual customer feedback is your sales and support team. So when I was at LinkedIn, I was working on a product called LinkedIn Sales Navigator, which was a popular tool for sales professionals. You guys might have heard of it. I incubated the business when I was there and ultimately grew it to over 200 million in revenue by the time I left. The organization itself grew to 500 people. 400 people were in direct sales. And my sales team was kind of the best people to talk to about really understanding what's the word on the street in terms of customers, in terms of the feedback on the products. And so we'd have regular meetings with the sales and our customer success team to really understand how we can make the product better from that perspective. So that's how you leverage kind of shared resources in the product organization. Another key constituent as a product manager is the executive stakeholders. So these are the folks who are doing product reviews to review your product to make sure it's ready to go to market. These are the folks that you're leveraging to green light new initiatives, to get additional resources, to get the green light on a new product you want to build. They're also super involved in the annual planning process when you're actually trying to decide what's going to be our strategy and what we're building in the first place. And so the product manager ends up being the liaison with the executive stakeholders, the one who's often leading those, spearheading those initiatives, those product reviews and whatnot. So they spend a lot of time of managing up to the leadership team, and that becomes super important. Equally important is your peer product managers. You know, it turns out, for example, when I was building a feature at LinkedIn, we were working on this feature called LinkedIn Contacts. And one of the things we did is put into the feed things like when people are mentioned in the news. While we had the Contacts tab where I was responsible for it, we had to integrate this feature onto the news feed on LinkedIn.com. Turns out there's a different product manager that owns the news feed. And so I had to work very closely with my peer product managers to build an experience that would create a seamless experience across LinkedIn, both across the news feed as well as the contacts experience. And so oftentimes we're working with other product managers to be successful. So this gives you a quick tour of kind of what a product organization looks like and all the different people that you're working with looks like. But I really want to dive into what are the product managers actually doing. So one of the common definitions of product management, which I really don't like, is that product managers are kind of at the intersection of business, technology, and UX. And that's definitely true. You saw that from the diagrams that I was showing you, that they really sit kind of in the middle of kind of these three functions, but it doesn't actually tell you what they do themselves on a day-to-day basis. And so the definition that I prefer when we're thinking about product management is that product managers drive the vision, the strategy, the design, and the execution for their product. So when I say product, that really depends on your role within the product organization. When you're a more junior product manager, that might be part of a feature. As you get more senior, that might be an entire feature. As you get even more senior, it might be an entire product, or it might even be a suite of products that you're now responsible for as you're getting more senior in your role. And a key thing here, as I drive each of these responsibilities, not own. The key thing about product management is you're not making all the decisions yourself. You're working with a team, and you're kind of curating the best ideas. And so you're driving the process, but it's not you independently coming up with these ideas, which is an important distinction. So this really breaks down into these 4 dimensions. And we're going to talk in depth about each of these dimensions. So let's jump right in and hit on vision. So what do I mean by a product manager owning the vision? So when a product manager is doing this well, they're articulating a vision. A compelling vision, it articulates how the world is going to be a better place if your product succeeds. That's it. It's all about saying, okay, if we're able to accomplish everything we hope to accomplish, not this year, not even next year, but in our long-term goals, how is the world going to be a better place because of everything we've built? And when I like to think about each of these dimensions of product managers, I think it's helpful to come up with a role model of who kind of exemplifies these ideas. And so for me, when it comes to vision, Elon Musk is by far the best person who comes to, when I think about kind of establishing an ambitious, inspiring vision. You look at the way he describes SpaceX, and the way he talks about his mission and vision for SpaceX is that it is important that humanity become an interplanetary species. He's taking it as far as you can go. And frankly, if you get into the weeds of what he talks about the death of Earth that is inevitable, that is going to happen unless we do this. This is about saving our very existence. It doesn't get any more ambitious than that in terms of a vision. And so he's the one who comes to mind when I think about vision. And when the next Falcon X flight is happening and they're about to, bring it back down, and I'm just hoping they stick it this time. I'm not worried about, okay, if they stick it this time, it's going to be a little bit cheaper for them to take up some cargo up to the International Space Station. I'm thinking about this. We're one step closer to being an interplanetary species. And so that's vision done incredibly well. So how do you do that? You know, there's many ways to articulate a vision. Some people talk about having a vision statement. I don't think that's enough, actually. The best product managers, what they do is they craft this as actually a narrative structured written memo of a couple pages. And Jeff Bezos has really popularized this amongst product managers because he requires this actually for every team inside of Amazon that's presenting a new initiative to him. They have to have this memo. And when you go into a meeting with Bezos, you spend the first 15 minutes reading the memo, quietly sitting around, and then you start discussing it. And the reason this is important, and Bezos talks about this, is that full sentences are harder to write. They have verb. Paragraphs have topic sentences. There's no way to write a 6-page narratively structured memo and not have clear thinking. And this is in contrast to doing PowerPoints and whatnot. And so I love this format, and lots of teams here in the Valley, at least, are starting to use this now as a way of articulating their vision. So let's look at a couple example vision statements out there. Bezos actually himself lives and breathes his own best practice. Every year in the annual shareholder letter, he writes the letter himself, and he makes it a point to really kind of talk about how he thinks about the company. I've actually read every one of these shareholder letters. It's been some of the best product lessons of my life. And I encourage you guys to check it out as well. And so let's go back actually to 1997, the very first year that Amazon IPO'd. In the very first shareholder letter that he ever wrote, he wrote this. But this is day one, and if we execute well for Amazon.com, today, online commerce saves customers money and precious time. Tomorrow, through personalization, online commerce will accelerate the very process of discovery. Amazon.com uses the internet to create real value for its customers, and by doing so, hopes to create an enduring franchise, even in established and large markets. And so when you remember when we all started using Amazon, it's because we saved a couple bucks buying a book. It's because we were too lazy to head over to the Barnes & Nobles. We saved a little bit of time. That was kind of it. Now, when we're thinking about buying a product, we go to Amazon.com, even search and discover what that product is that we might want to buy. That's that personalization, that process of discovery. And he knew this in 1997, that was ultimately his vision for Amazon and was able to achieve it. And so that's a compelling vision that he established super early on. Another great contemporary I like to talk about with vision is Stuart Butterfield from Slack. How many guys are familiar with Slack? All right, great. Most folks here. And so, what the thing about Slack is that it's a group messaging app. It turns out it's not the first group messaging app. There was IRC, there was Skype, and a lot of these other tools out there. But when he talks about it, he doesn't even talk about it as a group messaging app. He wrote this memo to his team right before they even launched the product. And this is amazing to think about as Slack now goes on to IPO, how far they've come. But before they even launched, he wrote this to his employees. That's why what we're selling is organizational transformation. The software just happens to be the part we're able to build and ship, and the means for us to get our cut. We're selling a reduction in information overload, relief from stress, and a new ability to extract the enormous value from corporate archives. We're selling better organizations, we're selling better teams. And that's his vision, better organizations, better teams, not group messaging software. And you can see them executing on this thoughtfully with all the product enhancements that they're building into it. Things like the platform that let you integrate third-party applications into it, and how they're thinking very strategically about that. It's another great example of vision. So the core challenge when it comes to vision for product managers is it's not just writing this memo and coming up with this memo, but it's actually inspiring the team with that vision. And so what this takes is a lot of communication and leadership skills. And so it's all about repeating that vision constantly with your team so they're actually familiar with it and they actually are inspired by it. And so product managers think a lot about how do I iterate on that vision to the point at which it starts to become inspiring, that it becomes credible. Right? It turns out if Elon Musk never got a spacecraft into space, his vision isn't even credible. So you need something that's credible in addition to ambitious and inspiring. All right, now let's head over to strategy. So when we talk about strategy and what that is all about, creating a compelling strategy is all about articulating how exactly you're going to dominate your market. So this is all about how you're going to win and be super successful in the market that you're in. The role model I always think about here is Jeff Bezos. And so Jeff Bezos has been super sharp about the way he thinks about winning in the marketplace. And so what's interesting about it is here in Silicon Valley, we always talk about profit margins. How one of the things we always want to do is to be able to create thicker and wider profit margins because that creates more profit for us, but more importantly, allows us to invest more deeply in the business. Invest in terms of R&D, invest in terms of cost of acquisition. And we're always trying to fatten our margins. And then there's Bezos, who says, your margin is my opportunity. And his whole idea is that, you know what? I'm going to take the low-cost provider solution. As soon as there's margin in the industry to be had, I'm cutting it right out, giving it straight back to the customer, leveraging economies of scale to be successful, and that's how I win. And it was actually kind of countercultural. You've always had the Walmarts of the world and some of the other kind of low-cost providers, but now he's bringing this into tech and software. And that's sort of a novel concept. And what's so amazing about this is in e-commerce, you're like, okay, you kind of get it. That's kind of, what a lot of low-cost e-commerce providers exist. But he's extended this very strategy into Amazon Web Services, their tech cloud computing arm. And what's amazing about that is they beat Microsoft and Google in cloud services, which is kind of crazy, being a company that not really kind of at their core is a technology company, but now they've done it by leveraging this strategy. Your margin is my opportunity. They undercut at every second the cost, and they spend all their time on operational excellence. And so that's a great example of a strategy. All right, so when we think about articulating a strategy, I think the old way that folks used to think about this is by coming up with a business plan. Turns out that doesn't really fly these days. The world is moving way too fast. No one has time for that. So actually, the kind of new agile format that people use is really just kind of articulating your product market fit hypotheses. This is just a couple of page document where you're articulating each of these aspects of product market fit. Product market fit is this concept of you ultimately want to achieve this for every product where you find resonance in the market for the product that you're selling. And so when you think about what those product market fit hypotheses are, here's kind of how it boils down into kind of 8 different KPIs. We'll talk about these briefly. First, it's who's your target audience? Who are you building this product for? And it turns out this is also an interesting one with technology companies because you always have an idea of who you're building for in the beginning, but it can change. At the very least, you get way more specific about who that target audience is, but you might even pivot who the target audience is that you're selling to. Then you talk about what's the problem you're solving? What's the pain that you're really trying to solve for your customers? You get into what's the value propositions. What, in fact, is the value you're going to deliver for your customer? Then you get into the strategic differentiation and competition. When you think about the marketplace, how are we differentiating relative to all the other competitors in the space? And you get into all the other key pieces of building a business. How are we going to acquire customers? How do customers even find us? How do we get them in the first place? Are we going to do a direct model with a sales team? Are we going to leverage self-serve freemium models to get free acquisition of users? Are we going to do paid channels of advertising? You want to think about this up front when you're actually building the product to make sure it's aligned with your overall product strategy. Obviously, monetization strategy. How are we going to make money? How are we going to actually sell this product? And finally, KPIs. What are the kind of key metrics that are super important for us to set as North Star metrics as we're thinking about how are we doing? As we're in this journey of building a great product, you want to upfront define what those KPIs look like. So let's look at a couple of examples of this strategy played out. So how many folks remember MapQuest? All right. So when you think about MapQuest, what's exciting about MapQuest is at the time, people had already made it a verb. You'd talk about just MapQuest it to get your directions. And it was the behemoth that everyone used. It's top of its game when it came to mapping software and mapping technology. And then here comes along Google. And what was fascinating about Google is that they came in leveraging these newfangled technology that had only recently made it into web browsers called Ajax and JavaScript and leveraged that to do something really compelling. So the old MapQuest experience, if you remember it, is you'd be looking at a grid, and let's say you want to move over. You'd literally press right, the entire screen would refresh, and you'd move a tile over in the map. And now we have what we all take for granted, super smooth scrolling. You just grab it, you drag it, and you move around the map however way you choose. It turns out that was revolutionary when that came out. And that was the technology differentiation that Google actually leveraged to make a far more compelling product by leveraging these new technologies. And it was incredible that they were able to do it. Back then, the biggest issue was bebandwidth. Being able to do it at a time and allow that scrolling behavior to happen when the internet that we were still using was dial-up in most cases. So it's kind of an amazing feat that what these guys have been able to do. And when you think about their strategy, They were leveraging strategic differentiation, specifically leveraging technology differentiation to be successful. Everything else, they kind of did the same way. How do you acquire users? You put up a website, people discover it, word of mouth. All the other aspects of their business, who they're targeting, everyone else looking for maps, everyone who's using MapQuest, they hope to use their product. All other dimensions of their strategy were exactly the same as the best-of-breed tool in the market. They just had better technology. So let's take another example, Tesla. So what I love about the Tesla example is that what's interesting about Tesla is they weren't the first electric car, far from it. There was plenty of electric cars on the market. But they chose a very specific market entry point to getting into the electric car business. You know, what they said is like, actually, there's lots of electric cars, but we want to go high end. We want to go luxury, and we want to go performance. This is really interesting at the time. No one was thinking performance for an electric car. If you're buying an electric car, you're a do-gooder who wants to do good for the environment. That's like what you're looking for. Like the last thing you're looking for is a performance vehicle. That's not the target audience. And that was actually conventional thinking at the time. Here Elon comes in, he's like, no, I want the car buffs buying this thing. Yes, it's electric, and yes, electric has all these problems, but let's solve those problems to build a true performance vehicle. You know, first car they come out with is the Roadster. High-end luxury car, launched in 2008. They only sell 2,400 cars. You know, for a car manufacturer, that's nothing. That's like a boutique brand in Italy building a few cars on a, you know, kind of just as a hobby. But what they then did is leverage that top-down strategy to move down market. They then built the Model S. And you can see here they've sold, you know, this is still back in 2012 when they introduced it, they'd sold over 100,000 cars. And now you see them playing out the entire strategy with the 3, making that mass market car. And this strategy of leveraging a specific target audience with a different value prop than what the industry had seen before ended up being a key strategic difference that made them successful. So this gives you a sense of what product managers are constantly thinking about, like when they're coming up with the strategy element of their products. And so here's a core challenge when it comes to a strategy. That vision that we talked about earlier, that should be a lofty vision that's stable, frankly, rarely changes. Your strategy, you're constantly iterating on. You're constantly improving until you get product market fit, until your product is in fact resonating in the marketplace. And so for each of those 8 dimensions, what you're looking to do as you're iterating is either adding more precision. Okay, you thought your target audience was B2B, now let's get more specific about B2B mid-market, you know, and then get even more specific within that. And so that's adding precision to your product market fit hypotheses. So that becomes a really important part. Or you're changing them if you learn something new. And so that's kind of how the strategic kind of piece shapes up. All right, let's dive in next to design. So when we talk about design, creating a compelling design is all about delivering a useful, usable, and delightful experience for your customers. And this is what you think about when you're designing products. And so the role model here is obvious. It's Steve Jobs from Apple, who's created some of the most iconic, well-designed products our industry has ever seen. But what I love here is specifically this quote. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple. This is like the most amazing facet of design. You know, even at NoChoy, when we're building designs for our products, we start with an initial design. And actually, we spend the rest of the time removing elements, trying to simplify it, trying to make it simpler to use, take out UI elements, take out features, think about, can we get away with less? Because that's what gives you a highly usable, useful, and joyful, delightful experience that you're trying to create. And that's what makes design really hard. So what's interesting about this is when I talk about design, we really need to differentiate what's the role of the designer and the UX researcher from what the product manager is responsible for, because the responsibilities within design are very distinct. So a designer might be working on the user experience in terms of coming up with the full fidelity comps and mock-ups for what the actual experience might be that you're building. They work closely with UX researchers that are actually driving a lot of the insights that are informing a lot of the strategic product decisions that you're making. What a product manager does is focus on 2 key deliverables: product roadmap and product requirements. So when I say product roadmap, what this is the product manager is responsible for answering these questions when it comes to your product. What products and features are built for our users, when, and why? And so this is all about saying, okay, there's a million things we can build for our customers, but what is it that we're actually going to build in terms of products? What are the specific set of features that we're going to have? And how is that going to shake out in terms of the user experience that we're creating? And so that's what they have to do. And a lot of this is prioritization. When are we building these things? Are we doing it this quarter? Are we doing it next quarter? Are we punting it to next year? So that when becomes a big piece. And then the why. The why is all about that influence without authority I was telling you about. They have to not only come up with this, but then they have to go convince their peers, their designers, the engineers they're working with. They have to convince the executive stakeholders when they're managing up. They have to convince peer product managers. So that why becomes super important. But like, what is actually a product roadmap? It turns out a product roadmap can be incredibly simple. Like I said, it's a list of what features and products you're going to build and when. So what I'm showing you here is actually the Q4 roadmap that we just finished up for NoChoi, our own product. We build our roadmaps in NoChoi, our own product. And so, we had 3 overarching themes. We wanted to acquire more users. So we had a set of products and features and things that initiatives we're going to do to acquire new users. Things like, we revamped our marketing site to add a features page. We created a bunch of solutions pages, NoChoi for agencies, NoChoi for freelancers, because we noticed that we were getting a bunch of traction within those audiences. When it comes to engagement, it's all about how to get people to use our products even more. We were looking at introducing lots of new features to make that more compelling based on what we're hearing from our customers. So we launched an Android app because we were missing on Android even though we're on iOS. We launched things like tags so you can easily tag notes in addition to filing them in folders. And this is all based on customer feedback that we were getting. And finally, we obviously want to work on monetizations, ARR goal that we were focusing on for our startup. And so we had a bunch of initiatives associated around that ARR goal. Things like introducing new premium features. We allow you to archive notes and notebooks, another frequent request that we got from our users. But we made that a paid feature and things like that. And so this kind of gives you a sense. These roadmaps can obviously be far more detailed. This would then break down into a more detailed feature roadmap, which would take each of these products that we are shipping and then detail in grave detail all the elements of those features. So that's kind of the idea of the product roadmap that a product manager is responsible for. And then the other big piece they're responsible for is for product requirements. So for each of these features, what requirements must the product satisfy to enable our users to accomplish their end goal? And so this is where a product manager is articulating, okay, what is going to be the user journey through this entire user experience? What are the key elements that we need to satisfy the actual requirements that the customer has to actually delight those customers? And they're putting this together in a product requirements doc, often called a PRD or a product spec. So a quick example of a product spec that we have here at NoChoi. So NoChoi is in the process of actually building a deep integration with HubSpot. We're going to launch this next month. And HubSpot recently launched a HubSpot CRM a couple of years ago. And we're building an integration which allows you, when you're in NoChoi, to take notes, but then keep your CRM up to date. So you can automatically take a customer discovery call or notes with your customers, and then update the deal stage, the amount of the deal, the contact, all within the NoChoi experience. And vice versa, when you're within the HubSpot CRM experience, we make it super easy for you to actually update and create notes. So you can be right within your CRM, but using all the full fidelity experience of NoChoi with our collaborative editing, note-taking experiences. And the whole idea is that, everyone aspires for your CRM to be up to date. We all know how hard that is and how often we're using other tools outside of our CRM. The goal was to bring 2 highly productive tools together, NoChoi from a sales note-taking perspective and HubSpot from a CRM perspective. And so what you'll see here is we're detailing in this product spec the overview of why we're building this integration. We get into the integration scenarios of like, okay, all those things I just described, you're going to be able to, within NoChoi, be able to view this HubSpot sidebar that's going to enable you to update various fields. We ultimately include the screenshots that the designer has built for this experience. And so this is the product spec, the deliverable that the product manager is uniquely responsible for. And so what makes this really challenging is that, running a prioritized list of features and writing a requirements list, you can do that easily, but to do it incredibly well is incredibly difficult. And the core challenge here is that you have limited resources in terms of your ability to actually execute on these ideas, but endless possibilities. Endless in terms of what you can be building. If I go to NoChoi, we've had thousands of feature requests that come in that people vote up on every day. And we constantly get barraged with customers being like, how come you haven't implemented this yet? So how do you decide? And this is really where the art of product management comes in. There's a couple tools that product managers should be using to be successful at this. One of the things I always stress is that product managers need to be falling in love with their customer problems. They really need to be focusing on understanding their customer in depth before they even start to design solutions. This is important because oftentimes junior product managers fall in love with their solution. They fall in love with the product concept that they come up with, but then it starts to hit the wall in terms of actually resonating with the customer. And what do? If you've done that, that becomes problematic because then it becomes difficult to iterate. But when you're really steeped in understanding your customer, understanding what your customer needs, their pain points and their problems, that's when you're going to be able to do this well. And what all the research has shown is that the best way to understand your customers is simple. Spend more time with your customers. And Jared Spool, he has this great blog on user interface engineering, kind of thought leader in the space, talks about this, comes up with a word for it, exposure hours. And what he says is that the closest thing we found to a silver bullet when it comes to reliably improving design teams, what they produce, is to increase the number of hours each team is exposed directly to users interacting with their designs, interacting with their products, and hearing from customer experience. And so this is the big thing that product managers should be doing. This is a big challenge. It's actually incredibly difficult to do this. A product manager has so many things that he's constantly being asked to do with his time. We'll get into the execution phase where he spends so much of his time. He's constantly working with designers and engineers. It's easy as a product manager to become quite insular, to be stuck within the four walls of your company and really end up focusing on kind of these execution elements. So you need to work really hard to get out there and talk to your customer. Honestly, this is the big opportunity that you guys all have at user testing, to simplify this opportunity for product managers to get in front of their customers and to do it in a scalable way that doesn't feel incredibly burdensome. I remember being at LinkedIn as a stark contrast from when I was at my smaller startups. You just have all this red tape to talk to customers. Like, we had to go to a legal review. We had to make sure they were in this database where they hadn't opted out of like all these things to make sure we were even allowed to go talk to the customer. I remember like at every startup, we do this today with NoChoy, like me talking to a customer is like buying someone coffee and being like, hey, can you spare 30 minutes? And getting that feedback and enabling that to happen. It becomes so much harder in larger organizations. And so I think that's where you guys all have an incredible opportunity to enable a product manager to get feedback in more scalable ways faster and better. All right, let's hit on the execution phase. So final phase here. Relentless execution is ultimately what is important for making your vision reality as a product manager. So if you've come up with a compelling vision, you've come up with a compelling strategy, you've worked really hard to come up with a design, none of it matters unless you can execute really well. This is where the shit hits the fan, and this is where you actually end up building real products. And what the fascinating thing about this is product managers spend most of their time in this phase because this is what you're constantly doing to be successful. So what does this all mean? When I think about the person that really kind of embodies execution for me, it's Stuart Butterfield. And I mentioned this earlier, that Slack wasn't the first group messaging application. There was IRC tools, there was Skype and whatnot, but they executed phenomenally well. They designed these interesting features that we all take for granted. I remember when Stuart started talking about this, everyone's like, what? He talked about this one feature called scene synchronization. What it is that when you open up Slack, whether it's on your mobile app or on the desktop, and you've kind of scrolled past a bunch of messages, you've seen a bunch of messages. Now when you open up the app again on your desktop, it remembers what you've seen and scrolls exactly to where you left off so you can see where you left off. It's called scene synchronization. Sounds incredibly simple. No one had this before Slack. There was a popular tool that was used as a replacement for Slack called IRC. It turned out if you didn't leave your computer open to the channel, all the messages before it, lost, gone, don't even exist. It's crazy to think about how far the world was different. And everyone was like, oh, they're the same tools. No, actually, he did the hard work of making these tools so much better. Not only does he design these features, it turns out it's a very expensive feature to implement. You're keeping track of every message and whether it's read and all this stuff. His engineers probably pushed back on it and said, do we really need this? So yes, we do. And this is what it takes to like execute like really, really well. And so that's why he's the role model I think about. So let's talk about what this execution really looks like. So one aspect of execution is project management. And so it turns out, classically, when we talk about project management, there's two disciplines that historically have mattered a lot. There's waterfall, which is this kind of classic method of starting with one phase, moving on diligently to another phase, and then another phase. And then there's the agile method, which is being far more iterative and realizing that it's very difficult to come up with ideas up front of what you're going to build, and instead you want to iterate on it. So what most of kind of the Valley has come up with is something in between the waterfall method and in between this agile method. And that's what kind of modern project management is all about. So when you look at this software development lifecycle that software teams are going through, what it typically looks like is starting with annual planning. Annual planning is exactly what all of you guys do as well. It's going through this phase where once a year, usually in November and December, you're thinking about what are going to be the big initiatives and priorities that we want to focus on for the next year based on a postmortem of what worked and what didn't work for the previous year. These usually require annual reviews with the executive team where you're reviewing your strategy at a high level and then presenting it to those teams. We then get into quarterly OKRs. So the goal-setting framework that you start to see popularized across a bunch of tech companies now is OKRs, objectives and key results. And it's just a simple goal-setting framework that says every goal should have an objective, which is what you're trying to accomplish, and a key result, which is an easy-to-measure way of understanding whether you achieved that objective. Right, so I showed you actually my earlier roadmap that was actually structured as OKRs. So, for example, we had an ARR goal, annual recurring revenue that we're trying to achieve, or a number of net new signups that we're looking to get. These are key results that you might have associated with objectives. And so what you do is you take your annual plan, you break it down into quarterly OKRs, and now you're deciding, okay, in Q1, what are the subset of the annual plan we're actually going to accomplish? And the key thing that happens is that when you go to Q2, it's not just that you're taking what you had already set out to do in Q2, but you're instead doing a mini postmortem on what worked in Q1, what did you learn, and then coming up with what are the new set of things that you're actually going to do in Q2 that may reflect your annual plan or may in fact be different because you've learned new things to cause you to change your plan. This then turns into biweekly engineering sprints. These sprints can be anywhere from weekly to monthly, but the most common is biweekly. And this is a period where you've taken your quarterly OKRs and broke it into what are we going to actually accomplish in the next 2 weeks? And so then you break it out into tasks for software engineers, for product managers, for designers, for testers. And they all sign up for what do they think they can accomplish in the next 2 weeks. And you usually track this in a project management system like a Jira or Asana or any of your favorite tools. And then again, you take it even to the daily level. So most R&D teams have a daily scrum where every morning, it's called a daily stand-up. Everyone gets together for no more than 15 minutes, stands around, and each person says, okay, what are you working on? What did you accomplish yesterday? What are you working on today? And what are you blocked on? And the whole goal is to, if you start to see bottlenecks, someone's falling behind, or you're realizing someone is bottlenecked by someone else, you can quickly ascertain what that bottleneck is and come up with ways to resolve it. Maybe you move some resources around, or maybe you change some of what people are working on so they remove that bottleneck. And so this becomes that software development lifecycle that's constantly running on the annual level, the quarterly level, the biweekly level, and the daily level. And so you see this happening with kind of pretty much every product team. And what's important here is even though it's kind of laid out very clean, it turns out you're constantly iterating. And you're going through this execution loop. Define, validate, iterate, where you're defining hypotheses. So your hypotheses might be, okay, this is the set of features we think is going to resonate with our customer. And then you're basically validating them. Validation could be talking to customers, realizing whether this design is going to work with your customers. It could be launching a feature and then getting metric data on whether the feature is in fact successful. Multiple forms of validation here. And finally, iteration, where you're actually iterating and deciding, okay, did it work or did it not work? If it worked, great, how do we double down? If it didn't work, how do we pivot to something that's going to work? And so you're doing this loop basically at every periodicity that I showed you, daily, biweekly, quarterly, and annually. And that's why this loop becomes really important, because you're constantly looking to learn. And this is what makes it agile. This is what allows you to learn. And so the core challenge for product managers is how do you constantly increase the execution loop velocity? Turns out the biggest challenge product managers face is that you only have so many shots on goal. Your product team can only implement so many features, and you're trying to improve that. And so first, of course, you're very thoughtful about being strategic in terms of what are we building and prioritizing appropriately. But you also want to find ways to increase execution velocity. Maybe you decide there's a way we can cut certain features but still accomplish the entire feature scope. Maybe there's ways you can accelerate your engineering team by finding what their bottlenecks are. I did lots of these at LinkedIn. I remember when I was at LinkedIn working on the Sales Navigator team. We went through this 2-week process where we looked at every meeting that engineers had, every single meeting on their calendars, and we were able to cut 40% of them. Save 40% of time in the meetings that they were spending time in when they weren't coding, they weren't doing engineering, they weren't really accomplishing much. And it was a painful process because everyone wants to be kept in the loop. We had to find other ways to actually circulate information. But that's one example of how you can increase execution velocity. Oftentimes we had other issues where we get these bottlenecks where a product team is ready, but the product marketing team wasn't ready for the launch. How do we better align those priorities doing OKRs to make sure we don't have any misses in terms of timeline? So product managers spend a lot of time thinking about this. How do we go faster? And it isn't about making everyone work harder. It's about improving the processes that we're using to be more successful. All right. So, another key dimension of execution for product teams is metrics. And so metrics matter so much. It's actually, frankly, one of the godsends that we have to be able to build technology products, that we can instrument those products with detailed behavior data on what our customers are doing with the product every day. And what you'll find is that most product teams have at least 3 dashboards they're looking at: acquisition, engagement, and monetization. Acquisition dashboards, all looking at the funnel of how new users are coming into your product, how they're going through your onboarding experience, how many are actually ended up using your product. Engagement dashboards that look at things like how frequently are people using our various features? How often do they come back to this new feature that we just launched versus a stable feature that we've always had? And monetization dashboards that are looking at everything from, how are we converting our existing users to paid plans, and what are we seeing in terms of churn and whatnot. And what's amazing about this is that, looking at dashboards seems pretty easy, but there's such a tuned intuition that you build around this. I got my biggest lesson in this at LinkedIn. So, what was exciting about leading the Sales Navigator business was that I was a P&L owner for the Sales Navigator business. I'd every week on Wednesday have to go to a meeting with our CEO and CFO and talk about our metrics because we were a publicly traded company. And so if my actual projection for weekly bookings was off by more than 10%, I was getting grilled, just constantly grilled by our CFO. And what was amazing is that our CEO, Jeff Weiner, had this incredible ability to look at metrics. He'd come into that meeting and say something like, hey guys, I was looking at the dashboard. Why are we seeing a week over week compression in liquidity in the jobs market starting in March? And we were like, what? Where are you seeing this? I have the same dashboard in front of me. And I remember feeling, this guy could read the matrix. He's literally reading the matrix. And I learned an incredible lesson because I was like, I can't be embarrassed coming into this meeting with him saying something like that about my business and me not even knowing it. And so I learned incredible amounts about how to build that intuition, how to read the matrix myself. And what it required was looking at the exact same dashboards every single day. Even had a business analyst team that was supporting me to really help me understand what some of these trends are. And when you get really good at this as a product manager, you get a feel for, that number feels off. Because you're looking at it every day and you have not only your typical standard deviation week over week and year over year comps, but you can feel those numbers. And so great product managers are constantly attuned to their metrics and really great at this. All right, so to wrap up here, the last section I want to talk about is we talked about the role of product management. Product managers drive the vision, the strategy, the design, and the execution. But the reality is that product roles differ depending on the company you're in or even within companies. And you're starting to see specialization of product management roles happen now more than ever. And so I wanted to help you guys understand how those roles differ depending on the product managers that you're talking to. So the first thing that we're starting to see is specialization in role type. Different product managers within the same organization might do different things. So at LinkedIn, we had all 3 of these types. And so these are just colloquial names I've come up with to describe them, builders, tuners, and innovators. But we'll talk about what kind of they're more classically called. So a builder is your typical feature PM or product PM. Their job is that they're working on an existing product, and their whole job is to improve it to meet the ongoing demands of their customers. So that might be adding new features, it might be redesigning new features, and what they're doing on a regular basis is talking to customers, looking at their business objectives, looking at where they want to be and their vision, and coming up with those roadmaps that they might create. So that's what builders are doing on a regular basis. And now, separate from builders are tuners. And so what tuners are people who are 100% focused on optimization. They're focused on optimizing funnels. And so instead of building new features, what they're usually doing is improving existing features, usually related to a funnel. The two kinds of tuners you typically see are growth PMs and monetization PMs. So growth PMs are people who are focused on how do we get more people to find out about our product, go through our onboarding experience, and be engaged. They're often running hundreds of what are called A/B tests, which are split tests where you're actually putting different experiences in front of the user, looking at the metrics of which experience is performing better. Maybe you've redesigned a page in your onboarding, and you have the existing flow versus the new flow. And you actually look at which one's actually doing better from a metric perspective, and then you decide to ramp the one that did more successfully. So that's what tuners are doing for growth. And you also have tuners on the monetization side. You know, we have a lot of freemium businesses or businesses where you're constantly trying to upsell a customer. And what you're doing is trying to get the free users to convert to paid by giving them more opportunities and messaging and positioning, talking about the benefits of paid, by making changes to the pricing page. All of these are kind of the work that a tuner is constantly doing. And they're rarely building new experiences. They're really focused on tuning existing experiences. Finally, you have the innovators. So innovators are a distinct breed. They're focused on building brand new products, and maybe at an existing company. So when I first built Sales Navigator, I was the innovator for Sales Navigator within LinkedIn, building a new product where, you know, LinkedIn had a whole broad swath of products. Our initial target customer was all about recruiters. We had premium solutions for recruiters, but we didn't really have anything dedicated to sales professionals. We had tens of millions of sales professionals using LinkedIn free, but very few using our solution specifically for sales professionals. And so that was an innovator PM role. And what is challenging about that is now you have to find product market fit from scratch for a brand new product. And that's way more challenging than simply incrementally improving on an existing product. And so you see people who are really good at the innovation PM role. That's kind of what I've done my entire career, either at my own startups or at larger companies. But it's very distinct from these other two roles. All right, so the other big thing you see is differences as you change your role and increase your seniority in the organization. So what I'm showing you here is a typical career ladder at a software tech company. This is LinkedIn's career ladder, but this actually applies to many of the tech companies and many product roles in general. What you see is that on the individual contributor side, product managers start as maybe an associate product manager. If you're coming straight out of undergrad, you usually start an associate, where you get heavy training in like a 2-year program. Let's say you're an MBA grad, you come in as a product manager. And as you get more senior, to a senior product manager, a principal product manager, what's happening is your scope is increasing. Not only you're working on a little feature, but you might own a set of features. You might own an entire product. And as you're increasing, you're getting broader scope in terms of the product areas that you own. You're also getting more autonomy. You know, as an associate product manager, honestly, you're probably not even worrying about vision and strategy. You're probably only concerned about execution and design. As you get more senior, you start to take on those responsibilities yourself. Now, as I own this entire feature area, I'm responsible for the vision and strategy in addition to the design and execution. And finally, when you get into kind of the manager roles, take a director of product management, your entire role might be vision and strategy. You don't even spend a minute on design and execution because the team of product managers that are working underneath you are really focused on that. And that's what's changing as you get more senior. And then obviously you have the parallel track of management. So a group product manager is kind of usually the lowest level manager. You might have a few direct PMs on your team. As you become a director, you might have 6 to 10 product managers on your team and so on. And so you see that change in role and responsibility in terms of which dimensions of product management you're focusing on, as well as changes in your actual kind of product scope. All right, you also see contrasts between product management at small and large companies. So that diagram I showed you of all the different roles within within the R&D team, that's typical for a larger company. I'd say 500 employee plus typically have all of those functions defined. And at that point, what's great about it is that you as a product manager can leverage all these specialists that are really great at what they do and can have the time to focus on UX design, on product marketing, and each of those dimensions. That's awesome. The flip side of it is that requires so much communication, coordination, and collaboration. And so you actually end up spending most of your time in meetings focused on that collaboration. And that's where the contrast comes in smaller teams. In smaller teams, there might not be a UX professional. That might be the responsibility of the designer and the product manager. There might not be a dedicated product marketer for your small feature that you're releasing. So the product manager does the work himself. And so you dig in, roll up your sleeves more in smaller companies. But the benefit is there's less coordination. There's less people you need to get in a room, rally around a cause. And so you do find product managers start to specialize. They either love bigger companies because they love the leverage they get in those larger companies, and they love the people aspect of a product management role. Or you get folks who love smaller companies because they love just worrying about product design and really talking to customers and don't want to be bogged down in meetings all day long. And so that's sort of the difference you see in kind of big versus small companies. You're also starting to see differences between technical and non-technical product managers. So you might find a product manager that has a title technical product manager. What that means is that they're usually working on a product that the product itself is very technical in nature. So when I started at Microsoft, I worked on a Visual Studio, which was a developer tool that we built to allow developers to write software. That's a very technical product. Everyone in that team had a software engineering degree from an undergrad university. And our customer were developers. So that's as technical as it gets. Another great example of a technical PM role is actually the Facebook newsfeed PM, specifically working on the ranking PM, is a very technical role. It turns out every story that you see in the newsfeed is 100% driven by a machine learning algorithm. And that algorithm is tuned with a variety of signals. And it turns out that PM is a specialist in machine learning and has a ton of knowledge of that. So it's a very technical role. Obviously, he's working with a ton of competent engineers in machine learning and whatnot, but he has to be very technical. And we're starting to see that actually a lot of even consumer-facing products like the Facebook newsfeed end up being very technical. That being said, all product managers need to be technical enough. And what do I mean by that? When you think about a sculptor building their actual product, you expect them to be well-versed in the properties of the clay that they're using. They know everything about the clay because that's what they're using to actually build it. In that same way, product managers need to be technical enough to understand, ultimately, if they're building a software product, they have to understand what the software is capable of. They certainly don't need to know how to code. That's definitely not a requirement, but they have to understand what that technology is capable of. And so that's the key thing to remember, that all product managers should be in technology products technical, but when you hear the technical name specifically, it means they're working on a very technical product. All right, and then the final dimension here is product versus project managers. So as I mentioned, part of the role and responsibility for product managers is that execution phase. It's managing a lot of those project management elements. What you're starting to see, some companies are in fact actually separating the project management responsibilities to a dedicated project manager. And so they're responsible for running the daily stand-ups, for worrying about where we're doing in terms of biweekly sprints and status. And so the whole goal of that is to offload that responsibility from the product manager so the product manager can focus on vision, strategy, and design and spend less of their time in execution weeds. This completely depends on the company that you're at. A company like Microsoft doesn't have any project managers. All of that responsibility is focused on the actual program managers in their case. Company like LinkedIn, they have technical project managers for these really large initiatives. So mobile has tons of features. So there's technical project managers who are kind of coordinating a big release, kind of all across that. And so you see it depending on the different companies that you see. All right, great, guys. So wrapping up here, I just wanted to hope this was helpful in terms of kind of giving you a sense of what product management is all about. And if you're interested in learning more, I do write a blog on product management at sachinrekhi.com. I've written over 100 essays now on product management, lots of detailed stuff about different aspects of the role. So I encourage you to check it out.